Okay, hello owls. How are you today? How is everybody? Okay, so this is going to be our first official flipped class week, and we're going to start out with the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to talk about students will know that the Industrial Revolution changed the way people lived and worked. You will be able to identify the causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. And so I just wanted to point out this cartoon there in the bottom left corner. And this is a political cartoon called The Silent Highwayman. Your money or your life appeared. This appeared in the 1858 issue of Punch magazine. So it says, "The Silent Highwayman, your money or your life." I wonder what that could possibly mean. We will talk about that in class, but just give the picture a nice little look over. You can stop the video if you like, take a look at it, and come up with some ideas of what this could possibly be all about. Okay, so on to the first Industrial Revolution. This took place roughly from 1760 to 1840. And here's a representation of one of the old machines that women used to make clothing and cloth. You can see there's a band that goes down somewhere, probably to a water wheel at a lake. And this was for spinning thread. Okay, the historical significance of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution changed human life drastically. Probably the closest comparison to this would be in about 2009, 2010, when people got their first iPhone. That was a huge change as well. For most of you, you probably don't remember that time. But it was a huge change in the way people conducted their lives. Suddenly, information was at their right at their fingertips. So, how significant was it? Well, that in the 250 years since that time, we have made much more things than were ever made for the 2,500 plus years before that. So, in a short amount of time, we have really stepped up our economy and changed our economy in a lot of ways. So, what was the Industrial Revolution? It's all about changing the way that goods were produced. So, the Industrial Revolution refers to a greatly increased output of machine made goods that began in England in the 1700s. This before the machines, these were handcrafted items. People made them in their homes typically. A craftsman of chairs would spend all day working on maybe one leg of a chair. And he had 4 days to work on the chairs, then maybe a week on the rest of it. So he's not putting out a lot of chairs at this pace. But industrial machines made this a lot more fast, and it also took away the skillmanship of it. So the Industrial Revolution, one of the key words for this is going to be machines. machines were invented, which replaced human labor. So the earliest machines are going to be things that you would walk to work. Typically, you'd find your work somewhere near water, because water was going to be the source of power. So you'd have to walk long ways, get to some place where they had a water wheel that would spin a simple device that would come out of the floor, as we saw in the spinning wheel there. But very shortly after that, the water power was gone to the wayside, and larger machines were invented. And these machines would be most likely located in the cities. So this is something that happens right along the same time as you would find us going through the agricultural revolution. With the agricultural revolution, there was less farmers needed, less landlords. Landlords had less and less tenant farmers. So these tenant farmers found themselves unemployed and really with no other skills but their ability to farm. So they made it into the cities, where fortunately unskilled labor was becoming an important thing in the cities. Now, instead of the craftsman that would spend a week or two making one chair, they would be replaced by a guy that just made the front right leg to a chair, and the guy down the line, he's doing the front left, and someone else is doing the seat, someone else is doing the back. And the machines are doing most of the work, but there has to be some overseeing of the machines. So you see, they become less skilled in manufacturing. They don't need to be, but jobs become more routine, more mundane. You're doing the same thing over and over and over all day long. Along the time that steam, then electricity was the next step, and oils, there was also an increase in need for metals. Aluminum, copper, iron, these were used in the machines that contained the power of steam or oil. Coal was a source of producing steam. You'd use coal to heat up the water, produce steam. So it has a rippling effect. So the energy timeline. Before the 1700s, we have water power. If you can see the top right picture, just right over here next to me, right there, right there. You can see a typical water wheel. It goes down into a river or some type of water and spins the wheel. The wheel produces a twisting motion that goes inside the place, and whatever twisting needed, whatever it needed to be doing, that was the source of power of it, that turning. After the 1700s, steam becomes more utilized. So we're creating pressure in a container and controlling letting it out, causing the spinning. And then in the 1800s, we start using more and more electrical devices, using electricity to move things. This starts about the mid-1800s. 1860s, oil in the form of kerosene, in the form of crude oils, begin to be used. And then in the mid-1900s, nuclear power becomes a thing. It's going to take a couple decades for that to actually be utilized, to be harnessed and be able to use it as a source of energy other than weapons. But if you see the plant that is down in the bottom, that is a nuclear factory. So it's producing energy. So where did this all begin? It began in Britain. Britain had a few advantages that allowed it to begin this revolution, not the least of which is the resources that it had. They were plentiful in iron and coal. The river system was very navigable, so there was tons of rivers and even canals that had been built, which could be used to move these goods from one location to another. It's important you have some sort of trade set up. Colonies supplied raw materials and brought finished goods back to the colonies for them to purchase. A good example of this would be cotton in the South was grown in the southern colonies in the United States. They would buy the cotton, they would manufacture it, and they would put it, make it into fabrics. The fabrics would then be sent back to the colonies for people to make their own clothing. Sometimes clothing was bought or made and then brought back as well. The government also encouraged these improvements in transportation and the use of its navy to protect the British trade routes. So ships carrying goods had the fantastic naval forces of Britain, who was the premier navy at the time, to protect those ships. And they were also pretty good at taking supplies from enemy countries and putting them to good use as well. So the Industrial Revolution, some of the things that followed along with this revolution is transportation improved. Ships went from wooden ships with sails to iron ships that use steam to eventually steel ships that were using oils and nowadays even nuclear power. Wind-powered sails to steam-powered boilers. Trains were becoming a thing. Originally they were steam-powered, and then they went to other things such as coal, and ultimately now they use a combination of diesel fuel that is a generator that makes the electric engine move. Communication improved. There was the telegraph, and then the telephone, and then the radio. So the background, this all began because of a couple of other revolutions: the scientific revolution, the intellectual revolution with the Enlightenment, and then there was the agricultural revolution that we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about. Landowners experimented in their areas where they were farming. They began to use some technology to help them improve their crops, such as the seed drill, which was basically beforehand you would have a farmer just throwing his seed into the field and hoping it didn't get eaten by the birds, blown away by the winds, and that it would eventually grow. And so there was a lot of scatter, there was a lot of waste involved in that. With the seed drill, it would make a hole, put seed in it, make a hole, put seed in it, so you can make better rows. You could avoid all the waste of materials and seeds. So crop rotation became a thing, and we'll discuss that in a minute. And livestock breeding. All of a sudden, people are starting to experiment with their livestock, trying to get better and healthier livestock, things such as cattle, pigs, that sort of thing. And here's a seed drill. It basically makes a furrow and drops seeds in it. So we have a guy by the name of Charles Townsend. He was nicknamed Turnip because he was quite the advocate for the turnip. Turnips were very nutritious, not only for people eating them, but also for the soil that they were planted in. Come to find out, they left a lot of nutrients behind in the soil. So this began to be a thing. You'd plant turnips to rejuvenate the soil. And eventually it went to an idea of rotating your crops. So what would happen is you would plant 3 different crops on 4 parcels of land. So what you would do is you'd plant something that you'd probably use for your livestock to eat. You would plant something for you to eat and to sell and market. And then you would also plant something for livestock and wild animals to eat, hoping that they will defecate in the soil. That puts nutrients in the soil as well. And then you would just leave one with nothing. You would just plow over whatever it was. Oftentimes, it would be wheat. And you just let it sit there and let all those things decay and bring all that nutrients back to the soil. So, and then they would rotate, have like maybe 2 or 3 year rotation of different plants as well. Just simply trying to produce better and more nutritious food. Very successful. The factory system, we talked a little bit about that, the development to replace the domestic system of production. The domestic system is back in the olden days, before the factories, a lot of ladies would weave their own thread. They would produce their own thread, they'd weave their own cloth, and then make clothing for themselves and for other people. So they would sell their goods. This is local. This is something that people did in their homes. They didn't need to go to big and large factories to produce these things. It was slow. And it was not really intended to get rich from this. It was just to supplement your meager income with another meager income. So the factory system made things much faster, and they could produce them cheaper. So this put the cottage industry, or the domestic system, pretty much out of business. Workers concentrated in a set location in the system of the domestic system. Now they were going to have to move to the location where they would do their building. And as more and more agricultural discoveries were made, there was less and less need for all those farmers. So people started moving from the rural setting of the farms into the big cities. One, because they needed to work, and the cities is where work was. They didn't have a lot of skills except for their ability to farm. So they needed something that they could easily get into. The factories was one of those. One of probably the earliest was textiles, which is basically what I described earlier, the making of fabrics. Making clothing, making cloth for clothing to be made. So here we have a chart that shows the domestic versus the factory system. The methods for the domestic was hand tools. Take a very long, slow process. The factory system used machines that did things quicker than a human could and made things faster. Location, domestic system was at home. The factory system was in a factory. So you had to move to the city, find employment in a factory. Ownership and kinds of tools. Domestic used small hand tools, and they were owned by the workers. In the factory system, they were large, power-driven machines, and they were owned by, they use the word capitalist here, which makes me cringe a little bit. They would not have used that term quite yet. And then production output. Domestic system would have been a small level of production, maybe a couple things a week, sold only at local markets. They would take their things to the local store and say, hey, can you sell these? And they would get a little bit of money for them, and the store would then turn a profit on it. Manufactured on a per order basis. A lot of times, somebody would have a need for overalls, and they'd come to the person they know that did this and said, hey, can you make a pair of overalls? So then they would make the person overalls, and they would buy them. Production was large level of production and sold worldwide on the market. Manufacturers would make more than they could sell immediately, anticipating their demand in the futures. Nature of work done by workers. The workers in the domestic system did the entire item from, like we were talking about with the chairs, the legs, then the sitting part, and then the back. And so in the factory system, workers typically made one part of the large product. So your friend Fred, he's making the seat while you're making the legs. This was most notably an innovation by Henry Ford of Ford auto manufacturers. He invented what was called the assembly line. This began in the early 1900s. And basically, the assembly line, you'd have a car moving down the assembly line, and as it went by, you put on that one part that you were putting on all day long. Maybe you were in charge of putting that front right wheel on while somebody next to you is putting the left right wheel on. So you're both sitting there and doing that all day long. Hours of work. Worker would work as much as he or she could according to the demand. In the hours worked for factory system, these were set and usually long daily hours. Sometimes up to like 16 hours a day. So worker dependence on the employer. In the domestic system, the worker had multiple sources of sustenance. So if he didn't sell any goods or she didn't sell any goods, the garden farm was there to help them. They would pick up their rifles and they go out and hunt. They would supplement their income by living off the land. Workers in the cities, they relied entirely on the owners of the factories. And urban living made personal farming and gardening very impractical. I don't know how many of you have lived in like cities like New York, San Francisco, but there's not much room there to grow things. You might have a little garden on your windowsill, and that would be about it. And that's not going to be producing enough food for you and your family for more than maybe one meal. Why the Industrial Revolution started in England. I think we mentioned this a little bit. They had the money. They had plenty of money that they could use at this point to make goods. The colonies were a market of their own, so they could turn around and sell these goods to all their colonies. They had many raw materials there in England. They had a large workforce. There was also the merchant marines in England that was a supplemental to the military. You'd have ships that were ready to defend themselves if the Navy wasn't around. So you'd have several ships that would accompany supply ships that would protect it against pirates and so forth. Their geography certainly was a benefit. They were isolated and protected by an island, but it also was an island where they could send their ships off to just about anywhere they wanted. Inventions spurred the industrialization. So there was many inventions, and we can't go through all of them. But just to mention a few, there was the fast-flying shuttles, the spinning jenny. These were simple tools that spun, and the spinning jenny would be used to twist fibers together to make string, or fibers that they would weave into clothes. So there was the use of the water frame, and this was what they used to, in the picture I showed you that spun, and this produced energy. There was the power loom. Spinning mules sped up production, and eventually the tools became larger and larger, and it was no longer simple enough to have them at home. They needed to be moved to a very large factory. So necessity is the mother of invention. So when you need something, someone is sitting there thinking, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And that's the brilliance of this whole idea of enlightened selfishness. Doing things not for the benefit of me because I want a steak, but doing it, the cattleman does it for his family, right? Spinning machines, the need to speed up weaving, and they came up with the power loom. As more steam-powered machines were built, factories needed more coal to create the steam. So mining took on a very, very hectic pace at this time. Mining methods improved to meet the demand for more coal. And if you've ever seen any paintings of Britain at this time, they'll often display a very, very smoke-filled, polluted sky, and this is because of all that coal being burnt. And the process of inventing really never ends. It continues today. There's always somebody out there looking for the next new big thing, and they're wanting to produce it so they can make some money from it. So the growth of the textile industry. Okay, so we have the flying shuttle, hand-operated machine, which increased the speed of weaving to make material. The James Hargreaves spinning jenny is a home-based machine that spun thread 8 times faster than when it was spun by hand. Richard Arkwright developed the water frame. This is a water-powered spinning machine that was too large for use in a home. So this led to the creation of factories. Transportation grew. If you're making things, you need to get them to market so that they can be sold. And so transportation was needed. So necessity created better transportation. With the increase of production, there was search for more markets for raw materials and better, faster means to take it there. So before the Industrial Revolution, canals, barges would be in canals. They would often be pulled by mules that were on the sides walking. Ships that were powered by sails. There was horse-drawn wagons, carts, and carriages of every size. During the Industrial Revolution, trains came about. Then we moved to steamships. So the ships went from being wooden to being coal-driven by steam, and they needed to be made out of iron and alloys, trolleys, and eventually the automobile. Here's some good examples. We have over here on the right a sailing ship. And then it was eventually replaced by a steam-powered metal ship. At least this one is not metal on the outside, but trust me, there's a lot of metal on the inside to contain the steam. So you can see the big paddles being on the sides, which pushed these vehicles. Unlike in the days of sail, there is something called becalmed, which meant there's no wind. We're stuck where we're at until the wind comes up. So industrialization in the cities. European cities go through a period of urbanization because of all the factories. This caused for some very uncomfortable living conditions. Sickness was widespread in the form of cholera. The average worker spent 14 hours, 6 days a week. And that was only after the clergy got involved and said, hey, you got to give these guys a break so they can go to church. And they were dangerous machines. They were steam, put under pressure, lots of pressure, and they could explode. Now, look at this picture here on the side. Now, this is a modern picture, but here's an area where the streets are just as narrow as they always were. The roads are a little bit better, but because at one point they would have been dirt and there would have been a trench in the middle. And so when you went to relieve yourself, you did it in what was called a chamber pot. And then you had to get rid of that. There's really no plumbing. So it went out on the street. So you'd toss it, hoping to get it into the trench and hoping not to get it on somebody that's much bigger than you are. So you can see where sickness and disease could become an issue. The factories were extremely dangerous, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that you could get your clothes or yourself or your hair hung up on and get pushed through a machine, and a lot of fatalities. It was a rough existence. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, you were at work. This created a lot of tension between different classes. There was a new middle class emerging at this time. You would have an upper middle class. These would be doctors, lawyers. They would also be these guys that owned these factories. Then you'd have the lower middle class, and these would be the guys that were overseeing the factories, the bosses at the factories that didn't own it, but were in charge of it. Then you'd have the working class. They're the ones that were in there making the widgets work. So this led to a lot of rioting, a lot of problems with what we would call destroying the machines to slow down the work just to get a day off. And interestingly, this is where the word sabotage comes from. City dwellers used to wear these wooden shoes. In France, they called them sabots. And the workers would, and this is allegedly, we don't have a lot of proof to it, but they would allegedly take off their wooden shoe and like put it in the machine so that it would cause the process to come to a screeching halt and things would have to be replaced, so that give the workers a little bit of time. So they would put their sabot into the machine, and that would cause sabotage. Sabotage. I like that word. But there was some good things. People were having to leave their farms, so it did produce jobs. Those jobs, they got paid for it. More goods were available to more people, even the poor. You had a chance at doing better. You could work your way from being a worker to maybe one day an owner, especially if you were in countries like the United States. But you could also go into middle management, right? You could become the boss of a factory. Being in cities, you were exposed to more culture. You had the ability to be around more things that would educate you. Clergy, museums, etc. So there were some good, positive things going on for people during this time as well. Corporations were being formed. These would be businesses that were not necessarily owned by one or a few people. This would be something that was traded on the market. So you would have somebody overseeing the business, but all of us could buy stock in it. And so when you have stock, you have a little bit of the profits of that company. And so you probably, if you were not very wealthy, you probably didn't have enough to influence the company, but it turned a profit. Uh, so anyway, businesses slowly moved into this idea of a corporation where, multiple, they would sell off portions of it, and then people would own it. You and I could own parts of it. This gives the ability to rise to large amounts of money and capital. A couple companies that started around this time was Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel. It would be hard for you to not find a library that was donated by Carnegie. He and his family were quite generous to provide people with an education through opening libraries where you didn't have to go buy a book. You could just go get one and read it, then turn it back in, get something else. So it started in England, and then it spread. It went to countries such as Belgium, Germany, other regions in Italy began making top-notch clothing. So social structure, geography were being expanded. People were moving faster, going to new locations. They could move faster, and you could get ahead for the first time ever. What was the impact of the industrialized countries? They exploited colonies abroad. This led to this idea of imperialism, which we will talk about in the next chapter. So the European powers started carving up portions of other countries and started taking those goods that they had, bringing them to their country, producing something out of them, and then selling it back to them. So we got the middle class. The middle class happened. You were either very rich or very poor at one time. Now you actually could be somewhere in the middle. So you want people talk about a gap now. Boy, could you just imagine the gap before there was such a thing as the middle class? This development also brought people together to form groups, things such as unions, things such as nonprofit organizations that would defend people's rights, things such as women's suffrage. There begin to be philosophy all about economics now. So our first of those philosophers, we talked about him last week. Remember, we talked about Adam Smith and laissez-faire economics. This is the guy. So reforms, it's an ever-changing thing. We're doing this all the time. We're moving from one technology to the next. Rules, laws, policies, they all have to play catch up. Eventually they do. When the Industrial Revolution happened, the laws and policies and ethics took a while to catch up. And so now people in factories typically only work 5 days a week and some even 4 days a week. They're not working much more than an 8-hour shift. If they are, then the owner is going to pay the person extra for working past those 8 hours. This is much like what we're experiencing now. We have a lot of problems with technology. For example, we just went through a thing with social media and censorship. Is it okay for them to censor? Is it not okay? So policies and procedures are still playing catch up. We have it today with our technology. At some point, we'll figure it out. But as soon as we figure that out, there'll be something else. It's the way it always works. Oh, look at this sad young boy here. Just completely filthy. He's got a kerosene lantern strapped to his head. So my assumption is that he works in the mines, digging up coal. You know, did I tell you I was once one of those miners, those poor little kids when I was 10? Yeah, it's true. I was there during this revolution, and my face was dirty and all that. Yeah, it's a true story, bro. True story. So anyway, workers joined and formed unions. They engaged in bargaining with employers if refused to work, and if the employers didn't help, then they would just simply not work. Some of them would resort to sabotage. Britain Combination Act outlawed unions, but they were repealed in 1824. So they outlawed the unions, but then they eventually saw the benefit of it, and they came back. The U.S. American Federation of Labor led successful strikes during this time. There was all kinds of techniques such as of union busting, where they would use very strong-arm tactics and violence to keep unions out of places. And some of these countries or companies were doing some not so good things. But like I said, it takes a while for culture to say, hey, this is wrong. It takes a while for the laws to come about. And it takes a while for companies to change their policies. But it eventually happens, and now, luckily, I don't have to be a miner. So, reforms. The Factory Act of 1833 made it illegal for children under the age of 9 to work in these factories. Then they passed a law. People could not, it was the children, could not work more than 8 hours a day. The Mines Acts prevented women and children from working underground. And in 1847, limited the work day to 10 hours. So no more of those 16-hour days. Okay, guys, that's going to just about do it. Thank you for coming to Edpuzzle and watching this video. And one quick little thing I want to mention. I got to thinking about the lectures and how unfair it would be if somebody got only 5 out of the 10 points because they didn't get enough of the answers. So here is what I'm going to do. No one will make less than 7 points for the lectures. 7 points is 70%. That's a C. So no matter what your points, you'll get at least 70% for the lectures. Okay? So there will be embedded questions here. Of course, you know that by now. But you will not get less than 7 points. Okay? Okay. See you guys next time.